Every empire has a vulnerability. For the most powerful black drug lord in New York history, the man they called Mr. Untouchable, it was not the police. It was not the feds. It was not a rival crew. It was a woman. Her name was Beverly Ash. The streets called her Shemecka, and she was the most dangerous person in Harlem. Not because she carried a firearm, not because she commanded a crew, but because she could walk into a room packed with the most dangerous men alive and make every single one of them forget what they were supposed to be frightened of. Shemecka was Nikki Barnes' mistress, the girlfriend of the most feared drug lord on the entire East Coast, a man sitting on a $50 million fortune, 300 custom suits, a fleet of Maseratis, and a reputation that made grown men cross to the other side of the street. Nobody in New York would dare look at Shemecka twice, not because she was not beautiful, she was breathtaking, but because looking at Nikki Barnes' woman was a death sentence. Nobody looked except one man. His name was Guy Fisher, and he did not just look, he took her. While Barnes was commanding a $50 million empire, while his face was on the cover of the New York Times magazine, while every dealer in Harlem bowed down to him, Guy Fisher was sleeping with his woman, and he did not care. Because Fisher was not afraid of Nikki Barnes. He was not afraid of anyone, and that fearlessness would set off the single greatest act of revenge in the entire history of American drug culture. 109 names on a list, handed directly to the federal government by a man who had never cooperated with law enforcement a single day in his life. All of it because of Shemecka. Before we get to Fisher, you need to understand who this woman truly was. Beverly Shemecka Ash was not simply a pretty face in Harlem. She was deeply connected. Her brother Steve Ash had ties to associates of the Gambino crime family, the most powerful mafia organization in all of New York. She grew up surrounded by power. She understood exactly how it functioned. And she understood how to use everything she possessed to control the men who held it. Shemecka was the kind of woman who turned heads on 125th Street without even trying. She dressed like money long before she had any. She carried herself as though she owned every single room she entered. In the 1970s, Harlem was a neighborhood overflowing with fur coats, gold chains, and luxury vehicles. And that was saying something. Nikki Barnes noticed her immediately. Of course he did. Barnes collected beautiful women the same way he collected Maseratis. He had a wife named Thelma. He had multiple girlfriends, but Shemecka was different. She was not simply with Barnes for the money. She was with him for the game itself. She understood the life completely. She moved through it with ease and comfort. She could sit at a table surrounded by killers and never once flinch. And she was useful. According to accounts from that era, Barnes allegedly used Shemecka to lure Ronnie Burroughs, known as Black Ronnie, and his bodyguard onto a dance floor where they were both murdered. She walked up to them. She smiled. She pulled them onto the floor. And while they were completely captivated by her presence, the hit was carried out. That is who Shemecka was. A woman beautiful enough to make you forget you were standing in danger. Charming enough to lead you somewhere you would never return from. Every powerful man in Harlem knew her name. Every powerful man in Harlem knew she belonged to Barnes. And every powerful man in Harlem kept his distance, except Guy Fisher. Guy Thomas Fisher was born in 1947 in the Patterson Houses, a public housing project in the South Bronx. He was the eldest of 5 children. His mother was a pediatric nurse. His father was an alcoholic gambler who beat his wife and his children and drank away the rent money. Fisher was intelligent, but he was consumed by anger. He got into street fighting, landed in Elmira Reformatory as a teenager, and dropped out of high school after his release. His first legitimate hustle was selling cheese and cold cuts from a van on Harlem street corners. Long hours, poverty wages, standing in the heat, selling sliced meat to people who had almost as little as he did. He also hawked bags and clothing outside department stores at a discount. That was Guy Fisher's entire life before everything changed. A kid from the projects selling cheese out of a van. But Fisher possessed something that most hustlers simply did not have. He had a charisma that was almost physical, a magnetic pull that made people trust him the moment they met him. His nickname on the Bronx basketball courts was Radio because he never stopped talking. But it was not just noise. When Fisher spoke, people listened. A woman named Olive MacDonald noticed him. She was dating Fisher at the time, and she happened to know someone who could change his life entirely. She introduced him to Leroy Nikki Barnes. Barnes took one single meeting with Fisher and recognized it immediately. The charisma, the intelligence, the hunger. This young man was different from everyone else. He brought Fisher into his organization. By 1973, at just 25 years old, Guy Fisher was one of 7 members of the council, the most powerful black crime syndicate in all of New York City. From a cheese van to the inner circle of a $50 million empire in less than 2 years, the council was Nikki Barnes' greatest masterpiece. 7 men, equal shares, pooled resources, strict rules, modeled directly after the structure of Italian crime families. Because Barnes had learned the game from Crazy Joe Gallo of the Colombo family, while they were both serving time in prison. The council received raw product through Matthew Madonna of the Lucchese crime family. They purchased in bulk, cut it themselves, and distributed it across New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and parts of Canada. By 1976, Barnes had 7 lieutenants, each one controlling a dozen mid-level distributors, each of whom supplied 40 street-level dealers. Over 3,000 people moving product for a single organization. Barnes' net worth reached $50 million. His jewelry collection alone was valued at $7 million. He owned a Bentley, a Maserati, a Citroën SM, multiple Mercedes-Benzes, and multiple Cadillacs. He had 300 custom-made suits and 100 pairs of Italian shoes, and the council had one rule above everything else. No member sleeps with another member's wife or mistress. 7 men sharing millions of dollars, holding the power of life and death over thousands of people. The only thing holding them together was trust, and trust meant one thing above all else. You do not touch another man's woman. Barnes stated it himself. The council's motto was simple: treat my brother as I treat myself. 7 words, one for each member. Fisher heard the rule. He understood the rule completely. He simply did not care. Because Fisher had been watching Shemecka for a very long time, and Shemecka had been watching him right back. In June 1977, Nikki Barnes posed for the cover of the New York Times magazine. The headline read, "This is Nikki Barnes. The police say he may be Harlem's biggest drug dealer, but can they prove it?" Barnes wore an azure suit that his wife Thelma had selected for him. He chose a red, white, and blue tie because he believed that crime was truly American. President Jimmy Carter saw that cover and personally ordered the Department of Justice to bring Barnes down immediately. By September 1977, Barnes and the entire council were on trial. 2 months later, guilty verdicts came down across the board. Barnes received life without the possibility of parole. Every single council member went down with him, except one, Guy Fisher. The surveillance evidence had been collected during a period when Fisher happened to be locked up on a separate charge. His attorney argued that he had not been present for the conspiracy. A hung jury followed. Fisher walked free, the only member of the entire council to escape conviction. And here is what Fisher did with that freedom. He used his drug money to purchase and completely renovate the Apollo Theater, the most iconic music venue in Black America. The very stage where Ella Fitzgerald, James Brown, and every major black artist in history had performed. It had fallen into complete disrepair, crumbling and shuttered. Fisher bought it, placed the deed in his half-brother's name, hired people from the neighborhood to carry out the renovation, and reopened it with Gladys Knight and the Temptations performing on stage. He became the first black man in history to own the Apollo Theater. A drug dealer from the Patterson houses, he sponsored Thanksgiving turkey giveaways for the community. He organized youth basketball tournaments. He drove his luxury cars through Harlem and people waved at him from the sidewalks. They called him the Robin Hood of Harlem, the real godfather. Nuz name-dropped him. Jay-Z name-dropped him. AZ Big L Fisher had the money, the theater, the respect, and the freedom, everything Barnes had ever had and more, because Fisher was free and Barnes was behind bars. And Barnes' woman, Shemecka, she was free too. This is the part of the story where a brilliant man does the most foolish thing imaginable. Nikki Barnes was sitting in a federal prison cell serving life without parole. He was never coming home. His empire was being managed poorly by the remaining council members. His assets were being drained. His legal fees were mounting with no end in sight. And Guy Fisher, the man Barnes had personally mentored, recruited, and trusted with his empire, stopped paying. The legal fees dried up completely. Barnes' money evaporated. His former protege was living lavishly in Harlem, running what remained of the council's operations, owning the Apollo Theater, and generating more money than ever before. But that was not the betrayal that truly shattered Barnes. The betrayal was Shemecka. While Barnes sat alone in his cell, Fisher and Shemecka began seeing each other. Not a single encounter, not a secret arrangement kept carefully hidden, but a full and open relationship. Open enough that people throughout Harlem were aware of it. Open enough that word traveled through the prison system like wildfire. Fisher did not hide it. That is the detail that matters most. He could have been discreet about it. He could have kept it entirely quiet. He could have shown even the smallest trace of respect for the man who had pulled him out of a cheese van and transformed him into a millionaire. But Guy Fisher was fearless. He had beaten a federal case that had sent every other council member to prison. He owned the Apollo Theater. He was the last man standing from the entire council. He was untouchable now. So he took Barnes' woman openly and without a single word of apology. Shemecka did not resist. According to multiple accounts from that period, she had been playing both sides long before Fisher ever made his move. While Barnes was constructing his empire and working 18-hour days, managing a drug operation that stretched across multiple states, Shemecka was already searching for the next powerful man. Barnes was in prison now. Fisher was the power in Harlem. She went where the power was. And Fisher, completely intoxicated by the woman, by his freedom, by the sensation of possessing everything Nikki Barnes had once owned, forgot the one rule that mattered above all others. Do not touch another man's woman. Nikki Barnes found out the way everyone in prison finds out. Through whispers, through visitors, through the coded telephone conversations that were never quite coded well enough. And something deep inside Mr. Untouchable broke. Not his pride, his identity. Barnes had constructed the entire council on the foundation of loyalty. Treat my brother as I treat myself. That was the foundation, the code, The reason 7 men could share millions of dollars without destroying one another. Fisher had not merely broken the rule. He had proven that the rule was completely meaningless. He had proven that everything Barnes had ever built was built on a lie. So Nikki Barnes, the man who had never cooperated with law enforcement a single time in his entire career, the man who had beaten case after case, the man who had mocked the police openly, the man who had posed on the cover of the New York Times and dared them to come for him, picked up the prison telephone and called the federal government. He called Rudolph Giuliani, the future mayor of New York City and at that time a federal prosecutor, and he started talking. 109 names written out by hand. Every dealer, every distributor, every lieutenant, every associate he had ever worked alongside. 5 of the 7 council members were on that list. His own wife Thelma was on the list. The mother of his children was on the list. Because if Fisher could betray him, then loyalty meant absolutely nothing. Then everybody could burn together. He personally implicated himself in 8 murders. He helped bring indictments against 44 traffickers. 16 of them were convicted. In a later interview, Barnes explained his reasoning with complete simplicity. These guys, they messed with me, so I am going to get back at them. One affair. 109 names. An entire empire reduced to ash. A $1 million bounty was placed on Barnes' head immediately. It was never collected. He vanished completely into the federal witness protection program and was never seen in Harlem again. He died in 2012 under a false name in Minnesota. Nobody discovered the truth until years after his passing. In 1984, Guy Fisher was convicted of operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. On 60 Minutes, Fisher stated that the ultimate betrayal is when someone you call your friend informs on you. But Barnes would have said the ultimate betrayal came first, in a bedroom somewhere in Harlem with Shemecka. In 1991, Warner Brothers released New Jack City. Wesley Snipes played Nino Brown, initials NB, identical to Nikki Barnes. His right-hand man G Money destroys the empire over a woman, Guy Fisher. The mistress at the very center of it all, Uniqua, was Shemecka. New Jack City had quietly echoed the real-life scandal, and it became one of the most iconic crime films of the entire decade. Almost nobody sitting in that audience had any idea they were watching a true story unfold on screen. Most men sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison simply give up entirely. Guy Fisher enrolled in classes. He earned an associate's degree, then a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, and then in 2008, a PhD in sociology. 4 complete degrees earned from inside a federal penitentiary. The high school dropout from the Patterson houses had become Dr. Guy Fisher. He wrote several novels and personally mentored hundreds of fellow inmates. Debbie Allen, the legendary producer and director, helped him establish a writing program for prisoners. He became the first federal inmate in the entire history of the United States to earn 4 academic degrees while incarcerated behind bars. On October 28, 2020, after 36 years inside federal prison, Guy Fisher was granted compassionate release. He walked out of Yazoo Federal Prison in Mississippi at 73 years old. He had entered as the real godfather of Harlem. He emerged as Dr. Fisher, with absolutely nothing left. The Apollo Theater was long gone. The money was gone. The luxury cars, the fur coats, the empire, all of it had vanished completely. He had spent 36 years in a cell because he could not follow a single rule. And the woman he had thrown everything away for had moved on a very long time ago. the same way she had moved on from Barnes, the same way she had always moved on, because Shemecka went wherever the power was. After Fisher's arrest, the power had moved somewhere else entirely. She was the most beautiful woman in Harlem. She was the reason 109 people went to federal prison, and when every last piece of dust had settled, she was the only one who walked away completely untouched. The council's motto was "Treat my brother as I treat myself." Neither man lived by it, and Shemecka, she treated them both exactly the same.